Hello and welcome back.
Thanks for joining us for another episode. I am Malcolm Childs.
And I'm James Skiffins, and we are just making conversation.
The show where we discuss the ins and outs of the model making hobby that we both love so much.
From the greasy sprues to the gloss coats and everything in between.
Wherever you are listening to us, please do consider leaving a review or 5 stars as it promotes this podcast to more people to enjoy. Also, consider tossing a coin to your podcaster on our Patreon. It just helps us make content for you.
So if podcasts are your thing, remember there is the Plastic Model Mojo, Scale Model Podcast, the Plastic Posse, and of course On the Bench. In this episode, we'll be digging deep into the sometimes dusty world of reference materials, which helps you tell the story of your model or even learn a new technique.
So I hope you're sitting quietly. Let's begin. Imagine this scenario. You wanted to make a model of something. Okay. And it had to be accurate because it was going to go into a museum. And this museum wanted you to build them a machine that was exactly a replica of what it was. Where would you go and what reference materials would you use?
So, yes, it would depend on the subject matter. If it was a airplane or something like that area of model making airplanes, then you could be going to museums. You could be going to see your dusty librarian. Mm-hmm. Or you could go to some good retailers that are out there that have books that are on specific subjects, like, for example, I don't know, a B-52 or a B-17, or I've just got bees in my mind for some reason. But yeah, so those you can find those at model shows, but online as well. And I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I know we were talking about one earlier, weren't we?
Yeah, Valiant Publishing do some, and also Osprey Publishing do some books. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, indeed. And don't forget your Haynes manuals.
Ooh.
Haynes manuals do certain subjects. They're a bit sparse, if I'm honest, but they are out there.
They have a collection of photographs, and that's what you need, isn't it? Close-up photos, colour references.
Yeah, it's something in which I try to avoid, if I'm honest, because to try and replicate a particular item or particular plane, a particular moment in history, it involves an awful lot of concentration more than anything else, because you've got to pick out those details and bits and pieces. And invariably, if you are doing a particular plane, say, for example, we're going to do a museum piece for the Curtiss Company, for the Tomahawk Curtiss P40. Okay, so you're in charge of doing the fresh out of the factory edition.
Right, okay.
And I'm in charge of it in service. So you would go to the library and you would get your books that are similar to a Haynes manual, where you would open it up, it'd have historical pictures explaining when it came into service, where it was made, etc., 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 and maybe a few pull-out diagrams of the airframe and how it was put together, and maybe the engine and that sort of detail. Yeah,
these would be probably provided by the manufacturer of the aircraft in the first place.
That would always be a good place to go if you can get them. But you'd also find that the Duxford, somewhere like that, which is a museum in the UK, they have a lot of historical data that isn't on display, so you could contact them, talk to them, and ask them directly for what it is you're looking for. So, for example, if you're looking for the working wire diagrams of the engine, they may have that sort of information. A reasonably good place to start.
Yeah.
But they also want one with it in service, and I've chosen to recreate the picture of the plane that was downed during the African campaign in the desert and was forgotten all about, and was discovered many years later, still in its position where it crashed, covered in a little bit of sand and eroded away by the wind and sand. Mm-hmm. So with that, I'm very fortunate because I've managed to, by Googling on the old intranet, I've managed to find some pretty good pictures of this discovery. But then I can then use the name of the photographer or the person that discovered it to Google that person a little bit more and find out more historical pictures, etc. So I've got quite a lot of detail of which I can show how the airframe is now rather than what it was when it came out of the factory.
Yeah. And I guess there would be details missing from the photograph. If there's only one photograph, for instance, you'd have to make up what's on the other side from other bits of reference.
Yeah, this is the thing where this is one of the reasons why I try and avoid pictures if I can for like doing dioramas and things, is because my argument's always been, you see a picture of let's go with this downed Curtiss P40 in the desert, and we've only got one single picture. That picture taken at that moment, to recreate that, you can recreate that, but everything that's visible the other side, the bit that's not, you can't see on that picture, you've got to make a guess. You've got to choose how you want, whether you're going to mirror what's on that side, or would it be worse? Would it be better? Who knows? Because there isn't a picture, there isn't a reference. So when I do dioramas, etc., one of the things I tend to do is I tend to say to people is that I use a picture as a inspiration. It's not a recreation. So yeah, reference materials can be great if you want to ensure that your model is as accurate as possible, dependent on where you get your reference materials from. But it also can be used on the other flip side as the, what they would term as the artist license.
There's a difference between replica for a museum and making something that is a historical event, like a crash or something, a more of an emotive event. I guess you could use both, You could use the reference for what the actual aircraft looked like when it was at the factory, and then how it looked when it crashed, and then you could just make up the details on the other side that you can't see in the photograph.
Yes, yeah, indeed. And I think to go off on a slightly different tangent, for example, I've been building a 144th Corvette. One of the most known Corvettes is the Snowberry, which is what's on the kit. The kit that the way I've built the kit similar, but I've managed to find a ship that wasn't the Snowberry, that had a different colour scheme, etc. But to make that model, I've used several reference materials. So I've used a shipbuilder's book. So that's written by people that make, or a person that makes ships, model ships. So you can learn how to do your rigging, etc., things like that. And then I've got another book which is about the Flower Class Corvettes. So that's a little bit more in depth. That's got the historical pictures. That's got the working diagrams of the turrets, of the engines, of the radios, the rigging, everything. It's very detailed. So, for example, when you look at the model and you're putting the model together, you may find some items that aren't correct. So they've been made wrong, which you can put right if you want to.
Yeah, I remember when you were working on the guns, when you were struggling to find out where the handles were for turning them.
They're light weapons, basically. They're like little Bren guns to a degree, but they would be for small arms fire, and they would, I would guess, towards aircraft, etc., like that. But on that, there was the ability to move your gun position by means of a, what do they call that? Handle, yeah. A round handle that you turn.
Turny, corkscrew.
No, a roundy turny thing, which is a handle. It's fine.
Let's go with that.
Yeah.
Let's go with that.
I could get my reference book out and tell you exactly what it was called, but it's up there on the shelf. Yeah, it says handle.
No, it doesn't. Does it?
It says round handle.
Oh, wait. Well, I'm really glad we used that reference material.
No, I'm lying.
Great example.
I am lying. I was just. Oh, there we go. So yeah, on this gun it is a round handle, which is actually called the column raising handle. Which right next to it is a picture of two sailors one with his hands on the handle, raising the other sailor's gun, which looked quite odd. I got to be honest, it does look quite odd. It seems very strange that he can move round in a circular motion, but he can't lift his gun up. What I won't do is I won't go into the stance of the sailors, because that wouldn't be correct. But yes, the book I used for that is called The Flower Class Corvettes Shipcraft, and that's written by John Lambert and Les Brown. Now, this book does actually also contain some models that have been made by these two gentlemen on this subject.
So these sort of books are written by experts, do you think, or are they just researched by experts?
I think they're researched by people that have the interest. Like most history books, etc., that are put together, are people that have most often, not always, but most often have come through education of the history subject, but they like the investigational side of of their job. So, you've got, for example, you've got people that write history books about, let's say, Dunkirk and Dieppe and places like that. And they are people that are historians by trade, but they'd like to go and investigate a moment in time and find out what it was all about.
We can take the books as gospel, being that this is what it definitely was. Or do you think you still have to take a pinch of salt with what they're saying?
Well, I think with certainly with the historian type books, most of them are well researched, obviously, because someone's had to sit down and do the research. But like most things, like, for example, I was telling you earlier about an author of a book to do with the subject of Dieppe. And the fact that this gentleman had written a book about Dieppe, he'd gone off and done some investigations. He'd looked at paperwork that had been released from the government, written a book, and then several years later, some other information come to light, which threw a whole different angle on the story. So he had to rewrite the book or revisit it. Probably would be better. So, yes, they are gospel at the time of the person's knowledge. So the same with model making, really. This is the information that I use to make these models, and we put together in a book.
So other than books, what other reference sources would you say you use a lot? I mean, certainly you can go out and you buy a book on the particular aircraft, tank, or ship that you're making. But how else or where else would you get your information from?
Well, we're going to cover a bit in another episode about the wonderful world of the web. But that is another source of inspiration and reference that I use quite a lot. So, for example, if I'm making a build of some description, for example, going back to the Corvette, in the instructions it tells me to paint some hedgehog mines, which are mines that were on the deck that they threw forward as they sailed through the water. In the instructions of the kit, it tells me to paint them a grey. That's it. Which is, to be honest, in that scale is probably enough. However, I Googled the image of those said items and found out that they have different colour rings on them. So, for example, they've got 2 yellow rings with a red ring on the main top area of the hedgehog mine. Now, if you're in a bigger scale, maybe that's some sort of detail in which you'd like to add on to that. In this small scale, realistically, it's a little bit difficult to recreate. Do you want that detail? But those are the sort of things in which you can find out on the internet quite easily.
Yeah, I guess once you know that, I guess you would be probably quite interested in actually adding that in, because you could, someone comes along and go, oh, I see you haven't put your yellow and red rings on your hedgehog mines there. You could actually make an announcement that you know what these things are, and you could tell somebody about it as well if they were looking at your model. It's something that you would. I would probably put them on if I knew about them.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for those sort of things as well. There are things like that I look at a model and go, that's not on the instructions. That's not on any kit that I've seen before. I'm going to do that because that's cool. The only proviso with that is something that I'd overheard, nothing to do with the model I made, but I overheard a conversation between two model makers, and they were discussing the rings on their rockets of their flying machine, and that one of the gentlemen was arguing that the rings colours were incorrect for that particular rocket. And the reason that this person knew it was because the person was in the RAF and he was an armourer. So he would know what colour rings go on what rockets, etc. What he would assume so. But obviously the modeller who has done his research through either relying on the instructions or a book had come across a separate answer to his query on his rings. So it is a bit of a buyer beware, because obviously Google is your friend to a degree. For example, the Second and First World War and that period, a lot of the pictures are black and white. So it's a guess, isn't it?
Yeah. A dark grey stripe next to a light grey stripe.
Yeah. There's got to be an element of guessing, unless someone has really delved down into the realms of reference to get that right.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting talking about black and white, because obviously colour and the right colour of things is a huge conversation within the model making hobby. Is that the right green? Is it the wrong green? Did they have that green in that regiment? They didn't have that green in that year, And I hear so many people saying it didn't matter what green it was in a combat situation. You slap green on and you go. That doesn't matter. And I guess if it's a black and white photo, you have no way of knowing, unless you have somebody who says we used this green on this day and it was this green. And how would you describe a green apart from giving a Pantone reference or
a
Humbrol colour?
This is the funny thing. I mean, I remember talking to a customer of mine that was in the army during the Second World War. He was a tank commander. He was actually a tank recovery commander. And we were talking about tanks and bits and pieces, and we were talking about model. I was talking about model making, and he was trying to stay awake. He had a Churchill tank that was a recovery tank. And his unit's Churchill tanks were given to the Canadians for Dieppe because they didn't have any spare ones. So they were taken away from him. And he said he remembered them lining up to go off with the Canadians. And none of them matched in colour. They were all different shades of green, although they'd all been painted by the same place and the same paint, etc. But he said the colours were always different. So, when you're mass producing something, there is going to be a variant to a degree in what you do. And I would challenge anybody to a point to argue that fact. I mean, obviously, if you're going to buy a brand new car and you want it in silver, then they probably will all match on the ferry, without a doubt. Obviously, weapons during wartime, especially in some theatres of war, thinking about the Russian front, etc., they weren't made and then someone go over them with a clipboard and go, oh no, it's got to go back. That's not the right colour, boys. That's got to go back. It was a case of get out the door, quick.
Yeah. Does it work? Yes. Go.
Yes. Can you drive it forward through that door? See you later. Bye. What about yourself? Where do you go for your reference guides?
The books, I would say, if I wanted to be as accurate as I could be, I would go with the book. I built a JU-88, Junkers JU-88 a while back, and it was a crashed one that crashed in Kent, and I wanted to recreate it as best as could. I did have a photograph of this crashed vehicle, but as we talked about earlier on, I didn't have the other side of the shot. I only had one shot, and the picture was cropped just the front, and I couldn't see each wingtip. What I had to use was to recreate this crash was a story that had been written in a newspaper about the crash, and that talked about the propellers coming off and slicing through the underneath of the bomb bay. So I recreated that, even though you couldn't see that in the photograph. Also said that the propellers ripped off the right-hand tailplane, the elevator. Also the rear wing called?
Aileron.
Ailerons are the wing ones. Well, the rear ones. Where the elevators are, those ones.
Oh, the sticky up bits.
No, the slidey bits.
If only we had a reference book to tell us.
The tailplane,
The tailplane, yes.
the bit at the back.
Yes.
The right-hand side of that plane had been the left of it had been removed by the propeller that was sheared off. But anyway, what was interesting about this one, it was the entire nose cone of the propellers had been ripped off because as it came down, they caught into the ground. And instead of the aircraft flipping, what happened? The central shaft of the entire propeller got ripped out of the engines.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so the picture that you see is of the engines with no propeller and no nose cone. And usually you see like a bent propeller, if it's made out of steel or very short propellers because they've been made out of wood and shaved down by the grass. But this, it was completely gone. So when I did that and I recreated it, I knew that people were going to ask, like, where are the propellers? And then I had to say, this is where the propellers have gone. They're not on the diorama because they're a mile back. But I put one of the propellers through the Bombay window to show that was where one of the one had gone.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone asks, I enjoy telling them a story, about this whole thing. And so the book that I got, Battle of the Blitz, it was a book 4 of this volume that I had to buy, and that had a particular thing. And I contacted the author of the article from the newspaper, who still was around, and it had been published into a book. And to get the decals and things, I had to go to an aftermarket manufacturer of the decals and find out from him which decals I needed. And of course, I just had to trust the fact that he had done the right research and had got the right ones, which I did. And they looked similar to what was on the photograph, so I had no reason to believe they weren't right. I just kind of had to bodge the numbers on the side because it didn't have the exact numbers that I wanted. But if you buy 2 I's and a K, you can still make an H.
Yes.
You've got the extra bit. So that's what I did, and kind of just made up the fact that where the skid marks of the engines were, because you couldn't see the back of the picture. And written word as well as images, I think, is important too, because it gives you that description of where things had gone wrong or where things were, and then you can recreate that in a model. I don't know if have you ever used a written word to describe something? I guess
yes.
Some of your dioramas probably have.
On some of my dioramas, yes, it is just the written word that's been the inspiration, the guidance. Because, as I say, quite often I will recreate an event that may have happened or might not have happened. There's not really any historical fact behind it. It's just that's what my brain has imagined. Yeah, so one of my dioramas, Sacrifice on the Altar of Freedom, was driven by that phrase.
Right.
So yeah, the written word can give a lot more detail and a lot more depth into a subject by all accounts, and even to a point, if you're reading a book that is just written word, a historical event, it will give you elements of detail within that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I guess you got films as well, to a point.
Yes,
I wouldn't suggest that you would use a film to some films to get your reference from, but maybe the events in the films, maybe.
Well, actually, yes, you're right in what you just said, but you're also you could have the fun with that too. So, for example, as you were saying, it popped into my head, was that you could recreate a scene from a film. Mm-hmm. The Battle of the Bulge comes to mind, right, where the German Tiger tanks were actually patterns.
Okay.
That were painted a sand colour and put a cross on the side. So you could do that just for fun.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, you could recreate the Tiger tank from the Battle of the Bulge.
Yes.
You know, and I've never seen that done, but that'd be quite fun.
That would cause
and of course, I know exactly what you're going to say, and I'll let you say it.
that would cause the opportunity for conversation.
Yes, on the models at the model shows.
Oh yes, there would be a lot of conversation about that. But then again, like a little bit like you were saying or recounting with your diorama, it's part of the fun of explaining what you've done and why you've done it.
Definitely, yeah. Actually, that's got me thinking about lots of different things you could do that were exactly that. You know, just like a special interest group of incorrect reference material.
Yeah, and there would be loads. If you can think of, I mean, I can certainly think of probably every war film there has ever been. There's always going to be something that's not right because they haven't got the equipment to recreate it.
Yep.
You know,
that's right. And quite obvious as well to some people who either have served or was, certainly is in that battle or used that vehicle.
Yeah, no, I remember a conversation about the one of the latest films that have been out, which was Fury. Now, I seem to remember that the tank used in Fury wasn't correct in some form. I can't quite remember what it was. I think it was the Tiger. In some of the shots, they used a certain tank, but it was loaned to them, and they could only use it for a couple of days in a field. Whereas when it was, there were other parts in the film that they were about, they used a dummy. They made a dummy up. Yeah. One of the most interesting builds I've done in the last couple of years was actually a Stuka, a Junkers 87 Stuka.
Yep.
Now, with that particular one, we were doing a group build which was called Under New Management.
Okay.
And the idea was you could build any subject you liked, but it had to be something that had been picked up from the wrong side, if you know what I mean. I found a reference picture of a said Stuka that was captured in the African campaign, was painted with English roundels, etc.
Yep.
And I thoroughly enjoyed that because it's not the usual paintwork that you would see on a Stuka, and it had a bit of a story to it, and I found it quite interesting to research it. So yeah, it's one of those things that can work for you and can work against you in some ways. But
it's certainly going to be an interesting topic when you put it on your table. Something that is under new management, because there's a whole story and there's a whole narrative and there's a whole list of things you can talk about behind that. You know, so was it just used as like a test aircraft to see how it worked, or
it was actually
what was the story?
It was actually captured with the idea that they could go over like trawl over it and see how it flew. Yeah. They flew it twice. As a reconnaissance stroke investigatory sort of flight to see its foibles and its weaknesses and its strengths and all that sort of thing. But as Rommel pushed forward, they had to leave it where it was. So it was recaptured by the proper side, and I think was repainted and put back in service.
That's interesting. Under new management.
Yes. Yeah, it was just really quite interesting thing. The same as with the Corvette, if I'm honest. I didn't want to do the Snowberry. I wanted to do something different. I like this particular colour scheme. There were only 2 boats in that period that were painted with that Dazzle scheme. And I just so happened to read some information about this particular vessel, which was the HMS Burdock. Had a very interesting career, accompanying convoys from England to Africa, etc., and back, and only had one keel, if you like, which unfortunately was one of its own.
Oh.
It ran over a smaller vessel. It rammed it, thinking it was the enemy, and it wasn't. So yes, it didn't have a very good career in that respect, but mistakes happened. That was part of the joy of the Corvette. It was someone that dropped depth charges and hunted U-boats, but it was also very much a written order that if you had the opportunity to ram it. And they did many, many times. We've talked quite a lot about accuracy, but what we've not talked about is the reference books that show you different techniques, show you the new techniques, or give you instruction on how to achieve techniques.
Yeah. So if you had a book that was talking about rust streaks, for instance, those reference books would show you how to, how you can do those rust streaks on that particular model.
Yeah. There are manufacturers out there that make those sort of products, and there are some of them that have made books which cover how to use their products. A lot of companies will do YouTube videos, tutorials, that sort of thing. So you've got obviously that media outlet, which, like I say, we will cover that in another episode. But you've also got books, for example, and there are many, but for example, there is a book from AK which is called FAQ. It's a series of books, and the one that's right in front of me right now is Aircraft Scale Model Making FAQ. So with this book, it really does take you from the very beginning of making your model, how to prepare your plastics, how to create stressed effects on your plastic kit, how to re-scribe panel lines, etc., etc. It then takes you through, additional things you might want to put on there, like wiring. It tells you what about brushes and varnishes and that sort of products. It talks about rigging. It'll go into the techniques which you've got. I don't know. For example, smoke stains. You've got sponge chipping, scratches. There's a whole bundle of things. It's a big book. Don't get me wrong. Very big book.
Yeah.
But those sort of reference materials can be quite invaluable.
Inspirational too, I'm no doubt.
Yeah. Now you picked up a book just recently, didn't you? Where you said, I think it was the cover picture, if I remember correctly, where you said, right, I want to recreate that. That's
right. Yeah, absolutely. It's the that's a test. Is it the Hellcat or the Wildcat on the front cover?
Hellcat.
I can't remember. It's one of the is it the Hellcat?
I think it's the Hellcat.
It's one of the Mig Jimenez Encyclopedia books, volume 4, I believe. I haven't got it in front of me, but it's volume 4 and it has a blue Hellcat on the front. And yeah, I want to recreate that exactly. And inside that book is how to do that, and I will do my very, very best to stick to it, but I imagine it won't look anything like what it's supposed to. But I will enjoy doing it. I will enjoy trying.
Yeah, I think those sort of books are really great. I mean, obviously, many of us model makers will get our monthly subscription to Airfix or Fine Scale Modeler and all that sort of thing. And in those sort of magazines, within all the other stuff that will be in there, they'll talk about weathering techniques or how they built a particular model and got a certain effect, etc. Yeah. So, those are invaluable for all of us to improve and develop our skills in model making.
Yeah.
But one of the other books book series in which I've got actually sat on my desk as a sort of an aid to my waffle is a book, a 3-series book about dioramas, because obviously that's a passion I have. Yes. Now, in these books they're crazy books. They really are. I'm going to massacre the name, so I apologize in advance. But the author's name is Laszlo Adabar, I think is how it is.
Laszlo Adabar.
Yes. He's done 3 books. One is Let's Build a Diorama, Building Dioramas, the Accessories, and Stone Effects. Now, in this, this is the sort of crazy detail that you can go into with dioramas. He shows you how to make taps for a bath.
Wow.
Which are no bigger than the top of a match head. He'll show you how to make hinges for windows and doors, radiators, shower curtains. That's just one book. The other one will shows you how to make window frames, door frames, and my favourite subject of all is wallpaper.
Wow.
Which when I read the book, I was like, wallpaper, really? Why would you put wallpaper? And actually, do you know what? It's amazing. I've done it. I've done it on a model, and it does. The effects are brilliant, and it's such an easy technique. But again, those sort of things are, what were these? These weren't that much money from what I remember. I think they were about £8 or something like that a book, something like that. And they're quite thin books, don't get me wrong, but they're just so jam-packed for the stuff.
Useful.
Yes, very really useful and inspirational.
Yeah.
I think we keep harping on about it a lot, the inspiration side of things, but it is, isn't it? When you make models, you generally are inspired by something, and then that has a knock-on effect to somebody else who looks at your model and goes, "Oh wow, I'd really like to learn how to do that properly."
Definitely, we should do a whole podcast on it. Again. That's episode 1, people. It is hard to talk about model making generally without talking about the inspirations behind what you're making and how you make the things you make, and also how you make your things as accurate as you can. Whether accuracy is important to you or whether accuracy is not, you still want to make it look like the thing generally, so people understand that it's supposed to look like a Spitfire, then it's got the right shaped bits on it.
There are people out there that love the minuscule detail of an engine bay that has every nut and bolt exactly where it is. I was listening just this weekend to On the Bench, and they were talking about I can't remember the plane he was talking about, but he was talking about a model plane, and saying that he did a bit of research and realised that all the panel lines were in a completely the wrong place to where they should be. So he had to, in his build, he decided that he was going to rub them all down and re-scribe them in the correct place.
Wow.
Because there were panel lines that shouldn't be there and there were panel lines that should be there but aren't. Now, that sort of detail, I admire someone for that, because that is an awful amount of detail to undertake. And if I'm honest, for me personally, never really understood why someone would do that. Unless you're making that museum piece that we were talking about so long ago at the beginning of this podcast.
Yeah.
However, saying that, the book, like, for example, I was describing a minute ago about dioramas, and the fact that someone can make a hinge for a door, has sent me down the road of going and buying the little beads that he says he used and the little bits of wire that he said he used, and I can't make them. But I've tried for days.
How many unused hinges do you have?
Well, funny enough, I do have a box of part-made hinges or scrap hinges, or yes, I've got lots of that sort of stuff everywhere. But I've not gone down the road of making a tap. No, no,
crikey.
But
I guess the fun and the enjoyment is recreating the thing as accurate as you can. And that is fun for people, or is a source of discomfort if it's not right. And for me, it has to be driven from a positive side rather than a kind of a negative side. I wouldn't, unless I was making a museum piece myself, which I've never been asked to. Then I would rescribe it. But if I wasn't, now it's got panel lines on it. That's enough for me.
I would generally go down the road of representation. My model is a representation of that subject. However, I have not, like I said earlier, I don't really understand why someone would go to that minute detail, but I do understand now how easy it is to get pulled into that. Because I made a diorama some time ago, which was a vacuum-packed mould, 3-story building, which you put plaster in, and you obviously, when it dries, you pop it out. So I made this bombed out building, 3 stories high. That's how the kit was, how the kit of the shell of the building was. And then all of a sudden I'm thinking, well, it's got 3 levels. I've got to put some stairs in. I've got to put some floors in. Oh, hang on a minute. Now I better put some detail in that room. And all of a sudden I've got 4 bathrooms to make. I've got 25 window frames to make, 6 doors. And for me, I didn't realise at the time what I was doing to a degree. But I'm sat in the front room and I was sat there with my chopper, my cheaper chopper, not my more expensive one that we talked about the other day. But I'm sat there with my chopper and some balsa wood and I'm cutting all the pieces up and making these window frames up and putting them in the way. Oh, it's a really, really pleasurable thing to do. Sounds really weird, but it was.
No, I can totally understand why.
And then I suddenly realised that, no, hang on, I need sash windows in there. That doesn't look right. I need to put sash windows. So now I'm Googling sash windows. And I'm making the sash windows to go in this frame. And all of a sudden, I've done all this and gone, oh, yeah, this looks quite good, doesn't it? Cool. And then I look at someone else's model of where the guy's done all the interior detail of his 1/72nd Chinook. The only thing you can see is through a pin dot hole of a window on the side. And the door's open at the back. However, it's hovering at a 45-degree angle, so you can't see in it. And I'm going, well, why'd you do that for? I don't understand that. But yeah, I sat there and made all those windows and door frames and bathrooms. Yeah, so it's really easy to get drawn into that.
Well, I think the reason is that exactly as you said, is it's fun.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
It's fun to make those little things, and to make them as close as possible. It is a fine balance trying to organize your time and your mental state to be able to do all these little things, especially if you've got 1,650 tiny hinges to make. I don't see the fun in that.
Now, it was yourself as well on your build that you're making at the moment. Is it your Corsair? Is that right? Corsair, I think it is your building. Where you were doing rivet detail.
Yes, I was. I was adding the rivets in that I had sanded out.
Yes.
Now, of course, that rivet detail is front and center of this aircraft. It's like having something wrong on the front stage of a theatre show. It would be right in the middle of everybody's eye line, and so it had to be fixed. Where the seam for the front of this Revell Corsair is right in the middle. So once you sanded that down, you take all the rivet detail out, and I had to put it back in using dots of PVA or dots of PVA.
Dots of PVA, yeah.
But I mean,
did you research that? Or did you go along the lines of what was present there at the time before sanding?
I didn't need to. Yeah, exactly. It was there before sanding. And I didn't want it to look like I've sanded it down. So, yeah, I just added them back in according to how they looked before I sanded them off. But I didn't go to the reference material to find out what shape the rivets should be, or I didn't look to see what the panels would be, because it doesn't matter. What to me matters is how paint reacts under the sun. That's what the kind of this piece is about, if you like.
Yeah.
And what sea air does to aircraft. And it wasn't so much about the rivets, but they are in the middle and then the front, and I had to make it look like they were still there. I could have, just put holes in and said some kid had come along and taken out these specific rivets.
The rivet collector.
And had like the rivet burglar, and have like a little child running away, little footprints and a little trail of rivets.
Oh, there you go. Yes, that's a diorama in itself. But I think we're going to cover rivet counters at another time.
Yes, I think it's 16. Reference material is not just about that old librarian image that you conjure up, but can be the information you need to make a subject accurate, or even a chance to learn a new way of modelling something.
By having a conversation about the biblical amount of reference material out there and how we can use it, we can hopefully give you some options for your hobby.
You have been listening to Just Making Conversation
with James Skiffins
and Malcolm Childs. Follow us on Facebook where we post photos, updates, and other nonsense. Just let us know what you are making and what your thoughts are on the conversation on this episode. We have to thank our supporters, who we dearly appreciate. Please support us in any way you can by sharing to Facebook or supporting us on our patreon.com. Next time, we will be just making conversation about social media and the influence on your hobby.